the social, what is this show? What do we call it? The social media news live. Yeah, so that's what it is. So many shows, so many times. So glad you're here with us. We've got a great guest for you guys today. Excited for you guys. As we go along today, make sure you ask your questions. We want to bring up as many questions as possible, so ask those down below. And we would love it if you would sprinkle the love across all the socials. And in fact, if you have somebody who's like, you know what? I know they need some help on LinkedIn because it's pretty poor. It's pretty poor. It's pretty bad. Make sure you mention them down below. Call them into the conversation. Even if they can only catch the replay, it'll be great information because Michaela's going to drop some awesome stuff today. So I'm going to go. Yeah, that's for sure. That's right. So I'm going to go ahead and hit go on the old podcast machine, and we will get started. Welcome to the Social Media News Live, where we keep you up to date on what's happening in the world of social media. I'm Jeff C., and I want to let you guys know we talk with industry experts like Michaela today, innovators, creators, and storytellers about the latest social media tool tips and tactics, and we broadcast live so you can ask the questions that matter most to you and your business. But I want to introduce my awesome co-host, Eric Fisher. Eric Fisher is the host of the long-running Beyond the To-Do List podcast. He's been doing it for over 8 years, and he talks with real people who implement practical productivity strategies. I've been practicing that, Eric, in professional and their personal lives. So Eric is also the director of social media education for Agorapulse, where he heads up the social media manager school. Eric, tell us a little bit about this school that you're headmaster of.
Yeah, I don't know if headmasters. Yeah, I probably almost need an extra title for that. But
right.
What we're doing over there is we're providing social media managers, whether you're starting off or you're been around for a while, we are providing free and paid social media training for you or your team. And you got to jump in and check it out. In fact, we're starting up some free webinars that we're moving on with an ongoing series of webinars. And you can go to socialmediamanagerschool.com or socialmediamanagerschool.com/courses/live webinars. I almost said webinars. That would be a whole other thing.
That's strange. Yeah.
Yes.
Very, very cool. So also, I want to let you guys know all this cool stuff you see going on right now. I couldn't be done without my sponsors, Ecamm. If you want to find out how to do really cool live videos like this and you're on a Mac, you need to check them out. Go to socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. That's socialmedianewslive.com/Ecamm. That's ECAMM. So I'm so excited to have our guest. I've been wanting to have her on for a while, and I want to introduce you to Michaela Alexis. And we're going to be talking to her about using LinkedIn today as a powerful networking and brand building tool. And if you don't know who Michaela is, she is a LinkedIn expert and a LinkedIn creator who helps businesses and audiences shine on LinkedIn. She's a LinkedIn trainer, professional speaker, and co-author of the book Think Video, Smart Video Marketing and Influencing. Michaela, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me. I feel like I'm finally getting less nervous around you guys. I think the first time I remember, I was like sweating through my sweater. And then today I'm feeling like more chill. So hopefully we'll have a good conversation. I get nervous all the time. So
it's Eric. He's really kind of, he's intimidating. Yeah, he really is.
No, I make it awkward.
You are.
So this first piece of news that I want to get you guys to talk about, because we get away from this awkward conversation, but LinkedIn shares this new data insights for 2021. And so LinkedIn had published some new usage stats, and it was stating its case for increased focus and investment in 2021. And a couple key points of notes were that professionals are signing up for LinkedIn at a rate of nearly 3 new members per second. And there are 2.9 million groups on LinkedIn, which include like industry and interest communities, company and university alumni groups, and professional associations. And this is what's really cool. So LinkedIn live streams have increased 89% since March, and member engagement is stronger than ever. They have 6.3 million users that attended virtual events on LinkedIn in 2020. There's been 55% more conversations between members from March 2019 to March 2020. So, Michaela, I want to ask you, so while the focus of LinkedIn has long been, business to business and networking, it's also gaining ground in these other areas like live video and virtual events. And there's all these, there's more opportunities that are happening for brand outreach and connections. So what should users prioritize in their strategy for 2021? Should they get on to new things, or should they just, keep doing their same old thing on LinkedIn? What are you telling people?
Yeah, I mean, I love seeing the shift from people just thinking of LinkedIn as strictly like this B2B platform to really starting to think about how they can, as a B2C company, if they're trying to do outreach to employee professionals, that's where they're hanging out. They're on LinkedIn. Actually, I have a client of mine, and it's a wine company. And initially they came to me because they were thinking like investors, partners, retailers, which makes sense. But then we started talking a little bit more. I'm like, well, who's your target audience? And they said, well, millennial women, after a work day. I'm like, well, millennial women after the work day, they're all on LinkedIn. So we've created a strategy that incorporates both the B2C, but also the B2B, but also the B2C. And so it's really, really been fun to watch that shift happen and help companies where I can kind of figure out the strategy for LinkedIn. In terms of priorities, I think it's like every other platform. There's always going to be a new feature that's being rolled out, and LinkedIn is like releasing new features. It almost feels like every week right now. And it really comes down to who are you trying to reach and how do you best reach them? So for myself, I have my personal style, things that I'm comfortable with. And I always want to make sure when I'm using LinkedIn that I'm enjoying using LinkedIn. So we could talk about live video and video in general. And of course, it's always going to be, there's so many benefits when it comes to video of having this face-to-face interaction, especially during a pandemic when people are kind of hungry for that interaction. But at the same time, I'm also a big believer in really playing to your strengths. So for me personally, I really prefer writing, but also having like these photos that go along with the story. But I'm also really into LinkedIn stories right now because I really like that more casual, candid content. I was just talking to you guys earlier about the bat that flew into my office and how everything was all over the floor. And that was one of my recent LinkedIn stories. So it's allowed me to share my personality, share what's going on in my life, and also have those like very candid, casual conversations in my inbox. So LinkedIn stories is something that I personally am really, really excited about. I know a lot of people are really excited about polls. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for polls. There's so many ways you can use it, whether it's to start up conversation, market research. That's a big thing, especially if you're in the marketing world, rather than putting together a white paper or a course. That's a great way to kind of figure out what your audience is actually challenged with in that moment, or if that idea of that bigger piece of content is actually something that they're looking for. So I've seen a lot of people doing those. The one thing that I will say with polls that I've seen, I mean, initially everybody was just trying out the feature. The ones that do really well are the ones that are like irresistible questions. It's not like, would you buy this white paper, or are you interested in this course? But it's really those like irresistible, because the problem, I don't want to say the problem, the differentiation between LinkedIn and other platforms in some ways is that it's a more passive platform. People will go on and kind of scroll through their feed. They're less inclined necessarily to comment or share. They might send you a private message, though. I get a whole bunch of private messages, more so than on other platforms. So polls are really great in terms of creating those conversations and pulling people out of lurking mode. But it's got to be questions that they really want to answer. So things like, one of the ones that I did was, how do you take your coffee, right? Like really, really simple, but like give a couple options and then ask, if it's something else, put it in the comments below. So give people a few options, but also give them the opportunity, if they want to also leave a comment. I think is the best way to approach it. That was a really like kind of like dorky example. But there are lots of questions that people are interested, like even like, where do you work from home? Is it in an office? Is it in your living room, in your basement, away from your kids? Like there are so many ways to approach this, but really make it so that people will really want to answer it, not just for the sake of putting out a poll. So polls, I'm really excited about. LinkedIn stories, I'm really excited about. I really love the idea of LinkedIn events, and I don't see a lot of people talking about them. But even if you're doing, you just mentioned how popular LinkedIn Lives are right now. Well, coupling that with a LinkedIn event where people can be notified when you go live, I think is important because we're all over the place, right? People's days are so jumbled. They're trying to manage kids and, dogs and working out and doing all these things all at once. So I think having those reminders is really great, and also to build community before and after a live event. So I did one event where I was doing a LinkedIn Live. I was interviewing Chris Voss, who wrote the book Never Split the Difference.
Oh, yeah.
And before the event, I actually went in, and you can create polls in those events. So I asked, how would you rate your negotiation skills? What's the one thing that you struggle with when it comes to negotiating? I would ask all these really fun questions, and that helped me kind of cater my conversation with Chris during the live session. And then they were able to kind of jump back into the event after the live stream and talk about their feelings behind it. So I think that's something that, especially if you're running any sort of events off of LinkedIn or a LinkedIn Live, that's something that you might want to consider.
Those are great points. Yeah.
Yeah, Michaela, I'm hearing you talk about the feed, and I've seen a lot of people get overwhelmed in terms of creating content as well as curating LinkedIn content. And so if you're looking to create or develop a personal brand for yourself and stand out in the industry, what are some of the ways that, you've given us some examples already, but what are some ways that we can stand out? And is there a certain kind of, amount of times we should be posting per day or per week? Or should we go with, hey, just when you come up with something that's of high enough quality?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mix of both, right? If you're just kind of posting for consistency's sake, it doesn't always work out super great. I'm a big believer in kind of like speaking directly from the heart and sharing things that you're passionate about. So I'm a little bit different in that sense. When it comes to my company page, though, I consistency is really key. So I spend, at the beginning of the month, I'll create all my posts. I'll reshare some of the posts that are doing well. So I do have a more kind of strict strategy with that. But in terms of what people should be posting, I think where people kind of struggle with LinkedIn content is that there's this idea that it needs to be this very polished, like everything's got to be perfect. Your lighting has to be perfect. Your message has to be perfect. You've got to have like 10 years in the field of the thing that you're talking about. And really, it's not like that at all. It's a lot more casual than what people might think. And I think, and I might have mentioned this to you guys before, but I always like to think of LinkedIn as like the world's largest networking event, right? Over 700 million users. So I imagine myself going into that networking event and having conversations. So I will actually use sometimes if I have Zoom calls, like those like Zoom calls that you have with like your industry buddies or your clients. Sometimes I have something that we talk about or something that I say during those conversations that I'm like, I need to talk about that on LinkedIn, right? And so kind of taking stock of the conversations that you're having off of LinkedIn are usually the things that people care about on LinkedIn too, right? We like to think that our struggles and our challenges are like super like only special people problems, but the reality is that there's like millions of other people that are going through that exact same thing. And so sometimes, and it doesn't just have to be challenges, it can also be these realizations or these lessons that you're learning throughout your workday or your work week. So, and actually my friend Judy, who is another LinkedIn trainer, she always talks about LinkedIn as like a workplace. And I also like that kind of mindset as well, right? It's like, if you were to go into a workplace, even if you weren't in the same department as that person, you might talk about things like the podcast that you were listening to on the way to work. You might talk about a book that you were reading or a show that you're really into, or, a client issue that you had and how you overcame that. So I think that's another really great way to kind of look at content. And I find that most of the time, just kind of reimagining what LinkedIn actually is, the purpose of LinkedIn, helps people to create that content that is more conversational. Because really that word is key. Is it conversational enough? Because that's what people are looking for on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so I wanted to circle back because, one, I nerded out when you said his name because I loved his book, Chris Voss, when you were talking about it. Because we mentioned that in this news article that they were talking about how there's been an explosion on LinkedIn Live, and we're actually streaming to LinkedIn Live right now. But on a strategy for, have you found what works best for LinkedIn Lives? Is it doing those interview shows where you bring up somebody who, like Chris Voss, is an industry expert and you interview them and provide value that way? Or is it better to do like just a talking head kind of Periscope-ish, like, I'm just talking to the camera? Yeah. Have you found out what works best for a LinkedIn Live content?
I have seen, and I'm going to talk more on like the company side of things,
Hmm.
but I have seen LinkedIn Lives used in so many different ways. I have seen, Microsoft will go live, not so much anymore because everything is virtual, but when they were running their annual conference, they would go live for 2 hours, 2+ hours.
Wow.
And at the end of their conference, they talk about all the new products, right? So it was a great way to involve people that couldn't necessarily buy the airfare and like get into the conference and all that stuff, but also had them stick around for all those hours because they were there because they wanted to find out about the new product. So I thought that was really clever. I've personally used LinkedIn Lives in a few different ways. I really like the interview style because I find it's just more dynamic. And especially now when people are kind of missing that workplace atmosphere, it's nice to kind of listen into conversations. But at the same time, if you have like an important message, something that you really want to share, I certainly think that talking head videos can work. I've also done contests, right? Like, so I will post. I did one thing where I created a LinkedIn post where I asked people to share a challenge where they've had to demonstrate, what was it? It was self-confidence.
Right.
And then a week later, I chose the winner of that contest and they won a pair of shoes. But I went live on LinkedIn to share the winner. So people had to kind of tune in to figure out who won the contest. So I think there's a lot of different creative ways. It's just making sure that you don't, like, I've seen this too, where people go live and they're like almost surprised that they're live. It's like, oh, wait.
Ooh, I hit the button. Yeah.
Oh, wait, here, people are here. And I guess we're going to just talk about the other thing that I see too that people do wrong is that they are like, okay, we've got Michaela here. She's this industry expert, but we're going to wait 5 minutes so that more people come on. Number one, it's kind of saying that, if there's 5 people there, that's not enough for you when really that should be important. And the other thing is that I have noticed that there are a lot of people that watch the replays, especially when it's somebody like if you have an interview with an industry expert that person really admires, but they're working that at that time, they're going to watch the replay. So if you're watching a replay and the first 5 minutes are like just 2 people kind of staring at each other like awkwardly,
right.
It's not going to be the greatest, right? So that would be like the 2 things is like, don't go live for the sake of going live. I know people get excited when they get access because it's still kind of like this novel thing, especially if you haven't used it.
Mm-hmm.
But right now we're past that phase of that being acceptable because it's been around for so long that people have developed expectations of there being real true value right off the get-go. So make sure that you have a purpose. For those that are, and you guys are great at being on the fly, but you still have like your talking points, right? And so something like having like the talking points, having some sort of outline, even using a script. Like if you're doing a talking head video, the only way that I would use a talking head video would be if I had some sort of teleprompter app. Because I know that I'm going to get on live. The nerves are going to get to me. I'm going to see somebody's name and get distracted. Like something's going to happen where I'm just going to go off on a tangent, and I want it to be really tight because that's what people are looking for, that like tight information in condensed doses. So I would say make sure that you have, if you're not great on the fly, I'm certainly not, have a script, use a teleprompter app, have all the tools that are going to help you get prepped. But I think I actually went off on a tangent talking about not going off on a tangent, which is very ironic.
That's great. So I wanted to bring up this question from somebody who is watching in one of our groups. She goes, I've totally forgot that LinkedIn has changed and there are so much more to do there. I need to hang out more over there. And so one of the things I wanted to bring up for this next question is like, how do you personally balance, the time you need to spend on LinkedIn with growing your other channels for your business, like, LinkedIn or YouTube? I know you even do cool stuff over on TikTok. How do you balance all that stuff?
Get distracted, learn hard lessons, and then, kind of refine. And I think that's just marketing in general. That's the reality is you have to experiment, figure out what your capacity is and kind of narrow it down, right? I think, is it the Marie Kondo, like where you have to like take everything out to see what you have and then figure out what sparks joy for you? I think the same thing is true for social media. I think sometimes you have to try the the things. You know, even for me right now, I'm doing Clubhouse, but I am still of the mindset that it is not for introverts. But I'm still going in, I'm spending a little bit of time trying to figure out if it's the right place for me. And then at a certain point, I'm going to take stock of what I'm already doing and figure out which channels make the most sense for me. So there's it's kind of two factors: what sparks joy for you, but also where are your customers hanging out, number one, but also where are they in the right mindset, right? Because we could say Facebook has so many people on there, so that should be where you hang out. But if your ideal customer is on there because they want to interact with their cousins that live across the globe, then maybe that's not the best place for you to spend your energy. But if that same ideal customer is on LinkedIn during their workday and they are prepped to learn, connect, and grow and potentially buy from you, then that might be a better space for you. And sometimes it surprises you. Like TikTok, I have gotten so many leads from and so many opportunities from, and that was never the intention. I was just experimenting with it, having fun with it, and it ended up being this really great channel. So I think try the things, figure out where your customers are, figure out the mindset of your customers when they're in that space, and then kind of narrow it down from there. But it's hard, isn't it? The FOMO is so real. I wish I had a good answer to this other than, you know, even when you do narrow it down, there's just always going to be those temptations. And even for me, like I see people that do really great things with video, and I hear people all the time that tell me to go on YouTube. And I could, but really, you know, my passion really lies with writing. That's really what I like to do. I've been doing that since 2016, and I come alive when I do that. And I think that you should do whatever you come alive the most with. I know that got like really like woo woo, but it's true, right? We have to enjoy what we're doing.
Right. That's very, very true. Very, very true.
Yeah.
Yes.
Michaela, do you have any advice for people who are approaching LinkedIn as an employee of a company? Because I know many people, they only fire up, you know, they only do LinkedIn when they're actively looking for their next job.
LinkedIn.
And,
yes.
you know, and I think, what are they missing out on by only going about it in that way?
Okay. So this sounds funny because I started LinkedIn as a job seeker, but my advice is don't use LinkedIn just when you need LinkedIn. It's kind of like that friend where you see like their name come up on your phone and you're like, because you know that every time they call you, they want something from you. And the same thing is true with LinkedIn. If you are just going on the platform when you want something from other people, it's just not going to work well. It's kind of, again, let's use that mindset of like, the world's largest networking event. If you're going around shanking people with their business card, well, you know, maybe you'll get one or two opportunities, but you're going to get a lot more long-term opportunities by just going in with this like idea that you're going to shake as many hands as possible and have conversations with people. Right. And so I think spending time, figuring out what the platform is all about and creating positive, investing like positive energy into other people. I don't know if you guys know John Hall. He's the author of, oh gosh, he's gonna top of mind. It's funny that I'm struggling to figure out his
top of mind. Yes,
top of mind. Gosh, but he blew my mind the first time I met him, and I'm sure other people will say the same thing because during that conversation, you know, you're so used to when you're networking with people, them talking about themselves, what they do, what they have to offer, and one of the first things that he said to me after I told him about myself was, how can I be helpful to you? How can I help you like achieve some of those goals? Is there anything that I can do there? And I was like shocked. Like I didn't know how to answer that even because we become so used to constantly asking people for other things. And I learned in that moment that the more that you ask that question or you give away great content or you share milestones. So like for me personally, people are invested in my story because I share all these milestones that I'm going through, these challenges that I'm having, the things that I'm passionate about, that when I do need something, it feels, and I don't want to speak for other people, but it feels good to give to people that have never asked for anything or are not even asking for anything, right? So I think really spending that time to create that positive equity in the platform is always going to pay off. And it doesn't have to be a lot, you know, spend 30 minutes to an hour on LinkedIn. Spend some time in your inbox. Spend some time creating a post. Maybe spend some time in the comments, kind of interacting with people there. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it makes a really big difference long term, I think.
Those are great points. Yeah. So our next section this is kind of fun. So Eric, talk about this a little bit.
For LinkedIn, it's fun.
So for LinkedIn, it's interesting. Michaela, I know that I've seen a lot of the stuff that you've done on Instagram stories, and I would say you're definitely somebody I look to as to who's doing it right. But, LinkedIn adding their own stories, and now, just a matter of months ago, adding the swipe up, which, gives you the ability to, send people to a call to action or a click through on a story is huge. And so I'm curious though, how are you maybe doing it differently on LinkedIn, or how are you doing LinkedIn stories yourself? Or do you have any great examples of uses for LinkedIn stories?
So the swipe up links, and I didn't realize this when I announced that the swipe up links were available. I think you have to have 5,000 followers minimum to be able to use them.
Or have a page, or use your page.
Or use your page. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Which I think is a good idea. LinkedIn is always trying to make sure that, the stories especially don't get too spammy. I see that a lot where people are kind of just sharing their products and services. I have been using LinkedIn stories in a little bit, or the swipe up link in a little bit of a different way. In that I know that there is a benefit to having a strong personal brand and using that to support the growth of your company page. And so people are always asking me, like, how can I use my personal brand to increase my traffic to my company page on LinkedIn? And one of the ways that I've been doing that is by sharing these really quick tips. LinkedIn stories are only 20 seconds, so it might be a minute, and I just splice it using an app. And then at the end of that, I'll ask people, hey, if you want more like these kinds of tips, I actually have a company page. Here's a link. Swipe up. And that goes to my LinkedIn page. Now, you could do the same thing if you want to get them into a funnel and things like that. But if you're trying to increase the traffic and you have, even like, think about it, if you have 1,000 people on your personal brand, that still helps the visibility of a company page that you're trying to grow. So that's something that I've been experimenting with a little bit there. LinkedIn stories still need a little bit of work. I will admit that I love stories in general, but there are definitely some things that are missing still from the platform, and I'll tell you a couple of them. Number one, when it comes to stories on Instagram, I just, full disclosure, I am not strategic on there. I just really love like creating and building a tight-knit community on there. And you'll notice that my stories are very conversational. I ask a lot of questions. I tell people to send me a private message. And so my inbox is always full on Instagram stories. So I went into the LinkedIn stories with the same mindset of, okay, just send me a message, DM me or private message me, or let me know what you think. And so many people are like, Michaela, I can't send you a message, because they were following me and they weren't connected to me. So I think that has got to change, because people are using email credits to tell me that they can't message me, which is like, oh gosh, I'm like, I can't believe you wasted it on me. But we've got to change that so it's more conversational, because that's really the whole point of LinkedIn stories. The other thing is that on Instagram stories, polls are really big. It's a really great way to have people stay engaged and interact with your stories without just kind of like sitting back and consuming it, where LinkedIn stories doesn't have that feature yet. So I'm also waiting for that. And it also is, you can mention people, which is great, but you can't mention pages. So that's another one that I'm like, waiting for. It's also not available on desktop. So it's kind of like, let's just think of it as like Instagram stories at the very, very beginning, which isn't bad, because I think that there's a lot more growth that can happen there. But I think definitely trying to at least make it conversational. If you don't have the same problems as me, like, none of this is actually relevant, right? If you have, say, like 1,000 followers and those followers are also your connections, Like, this isn't an issue, right? You can still ask people to send you a private message. It's only if you are on LinkedIn, like you guys probably have more followers than you do connections. So that's where it might be an issue if you're more of like kind of I don't know how to say that, like public figure, like I don't want to say influencer, but like if you are in the public environment at all, then you might have that issue. But yeah, I think definitely inviting conversation is the best way to use it.
So I want to talk to you a little bit more about that. So when they first launched LinkedIn Stories, a LinkedIn product manager, suggested that the format would be great for encouraging conversations on the platform. So you said it was kind of awkward because people are they're trained on Instagram
to DM you,
yeah. And so do you have to retrain them? I mean, are you changing your strategy over on LinkedIn Stories, or how are you getting traction on there?
I'm just making the questions more irresistible. So like on Instagram Stories, it might be like, I don't know what's a great example, but like, what's your favorite color, beige or white? I would never ask that as a question, but let's just say it's just these like casual questions that I ask throughout the workday. Versus LinkedIn, I'll ask things like, I was trying to choose okay, this also sounds really boring, but people really like giving their opinions on things. Let's be honest, right? So I'm using this website where you can actually get like custom blackout curtains created. And because I film or I do Zoom calls right in front of my window, I was looking for something really bold and colorful, created by a designer that I can put behind there. And so I gave people 4 different options and I asked them to send me their favorite, like number 1, number 2, number 3, or number 4. And people freaking loved that, even if they had to send me an email credit. And that's something that's really important to remember on LinkedIn, that when we're in that like work mode, we like to feel important. We like to feel like our voice is heard, especially when you're not around other people and you're not getting those pats on the back, right? So when people ask you for your opinion on something rather than a question necessarily, it tends to get a greater response on LinkedIn. So that's just something that I keep in mind, just to not constantly put out these like kind of casual questions, but really focus on those times that I need advice, and it's like fun advice too, and ask people to send me a message that way.
Gotcha. So the other question I wanted to swipe back on this swipe back on the swipe up is LinkedIn noted that let's swipe some way. They noted that the swipe up feature, and we talked about this is only available to LinkedIn pages. And I went, and this is Social Media News Live has a relatively new page on LinkedIn, and I had it. Or you have to have 5,000 connections, and you have to have the follow button as the primary action on their profile instead of connect. So besides, being able to use the swipe up feature, what is the rationale behind, changing your call to action from connect to follow? Because this is an old thing. It was back in 2018, but I don't know really the difference in why we should change it or use it.
Okay. So you can have a maximum of 30,000 connections. So when you hit that limit, which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't, right? If you are a content creator of any type, I mean, think about like on Twitter, Instagram, like all these places, like that can happen really quickly. You really have no choice. And so before there was that option to change your button, there's really nothing I could do, right? People would send me a connection request. I couldn't actually tell them that I couldn't accept their connection request, nor would I be able to even execute that anyways, because I think at one point I had 30,000 pending connection requests in my inbox. So it just wouldn't have been possible. So when that option to change that button to follow came out, that was actually really great for me, because that's what people were trying to do. They just wanted to be able to be notified when my content was available so they could see it in their feed. It really didn't matter if they connected or followed. And I think most people are like that. And a lot of people actually don't even know the difference between a follow versus a connection. So that is the biggest thing. I've also worked with politicians, and that is also important, right? They want to kind of communicate with the people that they serve, but they don't necessarily need to get into the nitty gritty. in their inbox on LinkedIn. And so that follow button is also really helpful there. So it's really, if you are or you plan to be a content creator, or if you're an influencer on, if you're a big YouTuber, or you're big on Instagram or in other spaces, if you're an author, if you're any sort of public figure, chances are you want more people to follow you than connect with you. The other reason why, and I know all this sounds very harsh, but LinkedIn inboxes are notoriously terrible, and they've introduced some new features that have helped people kind of sort through their messages, but it's still not very good, right? There's still no real way to sort between, pitches, spam, and those really important messages. So if I could go back in time, I would actually accept a lot fewer connection requests, because a lot of those people ended up spamming me right away. And then, I forgot about it, and there's still a connection of mine where it's just kind of taking up space in my inbox that could otherwise be somebody that I could really, truly connect with. So it's more of like a strategic play than anything. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of like tricky to explain the difference.
No, that was great, because I was very confused, but that gives me an idea kind of moving forward. By the way, before we get to the next and our final news item, I wanted to make sure that if you guys are interested in how I'm doing this, switching cameras, this awesome stuff that we're doing, this show could not be made possible without the super awesome software called Ecamm. It allows you to switch screens. It's Mac-based, but it allows you to do all these really cool things that you're seeing, switching screens, pulling up lower thirds, all that stuff. If you'd like to find out more, go to socialmedianewslive.com/ecamm. That's socialmedianewslive.com/ecamm, ECAMM, and tell them that Jeff sent you. Anyway, all right, let's go on to our final segment here. And Eric, go ahead and break this down for us.
Yeah. So to keep on that train of talking about stories here on LinkedIn. So at the end of 2020, LinkedIn announced that it's testing some new ways for marketers to use the stories format to reach and engage audiences in new ways. And obviously one of those new ways is going to be through stories ads. So it's testing stories ads with a limited number of advertisers in a closed beta. But then this week, LinkedIn's parent company, Microsoft, announced that LinkedIn's ad business is on the rise, and that it saw a major boost last quarter of 2020, and that that basically it accounted for more than a third of LinkedIn's total revenue. That's huge. So yeah, it's pretty big news. And some of the other details here about those story ads, that basically stories ads at the time of the reporting, that story ads can help brands grow their reach with community of more than 722 million members with video and image ads. I know for me, LinkedIn ads in the feed as well as stories ads are the ones that get me every single time. Those are the ones that I stop and look at more than any other platform.
Right.
So I'm curious what you think of this.
Yeah, I think I love the idea in theory, and I know that story ads work on other platforms. I'm a big sucker for them too. Those are actually the only ones that I pay attention to. I think that, and this is not like trying to, plug myself here, but I think that there's got to be a lot more training for companies on LinkedIn. And I know that there's just been this boom in new companies that have created these LinkedIn pages. But I still notice that there's a lot of work still to be done to get people out of this mindset of, a lot of these companies that are creating pages come from the era of, especially B2B companies, you take out a billboard ad, or you spend a ridiculous amount of money for a Yellow Pages ad, and that's how you advertise to people. And so their LinkedIn page has really become basically an extension of their newsletter. And that is not, to say everybody's like that. There are some companies that are doing a really great job. One of them that I constantly mention is Gong. It's a small company. They're absolutely crushing it on LinkedIn. But if you look at how they are using the platform, they're really focused on community, just building a community. They very rarely talk about their products. It's more of a service hub where salespeople can go and learn more about how to improve their skill. And their software is kind of like that next step of how they can do that. Whole Foods is another great example of, just spotlighting their employees to attract new talent. So I think that before we even talk about story ads, companies have to get really good at organic content, because no matter how much money you put on a story ad, if the imagery is not compelling to people, it's not going to make any real difference. So really focus on creating a community. Using tools that already exist, like polls, is another great way to figure out what people actually want. And then I think LinkedIn story ads are going to be awesome. Like that might be something that I might explore. The only issue with ads in general on LinkedIn is that they're so expensive. But I certainly see the value of being able to target people so well on the platform. And I think that's a brand new, I really like the idea, because I mean, even with like I think that they have like the inbox ad, and I've seen those. I'm not a huge fan of them. I haven't seen any that I've been inclined to click on, but a story that's 20 seconds might also force people or companies and brands to learn how to be more concise and compelling with their content, which is what I'm hoping for. I hope I see successful LinkedIn story ads.
So I want to circle back, because you said something really, really key that I know for me, I haven't done it because of this, is, the number one thing we hear about LinkedIn's is their ads they're too expensive. So tell us what we should know about LinkedIn ads. And so how can like an individual like me, or a solopreneur, or even a small business, let's say like a flower shop with these smaller ad budgets, should they and can they get started with LinkedIn ads?
No, I mean, AJ is like the expert, the
Right.
go-to expert when it comes to LinkedIn ads. And I think the last time that I talked to him, he was saying you should have a lifetime value of 15,000. It might be more than that now, but they're expensive. I mean, it's like I'm talking $7 to $8 a click. So I'm not a candidate for LinkedIn ads as of yet. Maybe that will change in the future. Now, AJ does say that if you want to experiment with LinkedIn ads, to use whatever imagery, whether it's a video, photo, all of that stuff, on other platforms first that are cheaper, and figure out what works best, and then bring that over to LinkedIn. So if you are a kind of like an in-between company where you do have a high lifetime value, but it's not, quite what AJ recommends, but you really want to try LinkedIn story ads, my recommendation would be to try that ad on somewhere else like Facebook or on Instagram. I think Twitter has stories as well too. Try it on different platforms, put a little bit of money on it, and figure out what works before you dive into LinkedIn, because it gets really expensive really quick.
Yeah, it does. So I want to pull up some comments before we start wrapping things up. Lisa says, awesome information from the LinkedIn Queen.
Lisa!
Thank you so much, Lisa, for coming in. And let's see, we're talking about, being focused, and been working social media for 11 years, learned to really focus and split my time between those different things. But here's a great question from Lisa. She goes, what are some tips for a nonprofit organizations on LinkedIn? You mentioned doing a great job. Some of those companies you mentioned do a really good job organically, because ads are so expensive. So what are some ideas for nonprofits?
Okay, so I can actually answer this, because I've worked with we call it the not-for-profits in Canada, so it always is like a little bit of but I worked with Habitat for Humanity a few years ago, and one of the things that we really focused on was telling the stories of the volunteers. So number one, kind of like starting with why they got involved, right? Because there are people that, like look at Jimmy Carter. He's like the perfect example, right? He's been like associated with Habitat for Humanity for who knows how long, right? Longer than my lifetime. But a lot of times they'll focus on things like that, but why? Like, where did that desire come from? Because there are so many nonprofits that you can work with, but why do you choose to spend your time particularly with that organization? And a lot of times, like, these are like very heartfelt reasons that people decide to give up their time and energy to work with these organizations. Like there's one oh gosh, you guys are killing me. I'm so Canadian right now. There's a nonprofit that I worked with, which is like a cancer support center. And a lot of the volunteers either had somebody in their family or a friend that dealt with or passed away from cancer, or is a cancer survivor themselves. And so those stories were really important to spotlight. And then also the end result, you know, the transformation, the before and after, but also the people that are directly impacted by the volunteers' efforts, right? Because if you're trying to reach donors, we like tend to think that we make all these very logical, calculated decisions, but really and truly, our decisions, you know, big and small, come from our heart, right? We buy houses, but we work with a realtor that gets us or understands the neighborhood, and so everything is driven by emotion. And so even if you're speaking to donors, which you think is like very kind of calculated and logical, those people are still going to spend money or volunteer their own time based on how they feel about the story of the organization. So really telling those stories and focusing on the people that make the organization what it is, I think is really, really key. I'm trying to think of anything else that we did there. I think LinkedIn Stories would be another great avenue for nonprofits. That certainly could be really, really cool, especially for companies like Habitat for Humanity, where you actually go through a building process and you can show the behind the scenes of like, okay, this is day 2. We're breaking ground today. I think actually showing that journey from like, there's nothing here to this is a house to I give myself marketing goosebumps. I'm such a dork. Oh my God.
You're coming up with all these ideas.
But like actually seeing a family walk through the door, that's where the emotion comes from, right? Like that whole journey. And so finding ways to do that, I think would actually be more powerful than the before and after, right? Because if you're actually invested in like, hey, this is day 23, and look, we've got the windows done, and you can actually feel like you are part of the action, I feel like you're going to be more inclined to actually donate next time.
Oh, I think that's genius. So, I mean, if you guys haven't figured it out, Michaela knows her stuff. And like Don says from over on LinkedIn watching us, he goes, he totally got it wrong. I figured Facebook and Instagram would be the place for me, but I got so much more engagement on LinkedIn and also Twitter. So you never know where it's going to happen. So if you haven't tried LinkedIn for a while, you need to go do this. But Michaela, thank you so much for all the knowledge bombs you dropped today. But where can people find out more about Michaela Alexis?
Well, definitely on LinkedIn. It's just Michaela. It's Michael with an A. I'm the old school Michaela. Alexis is my last name. My company page is where you can find all of the LinkedIn training and tips and tricks and all that good stuff. It's very confusingly the same thing. So Michaela Alexis, but you'll notice a little pink logo for the company page. My website is micalexis.com. You can find me on Instagram. Just be prepared for, you know, LinkedIn is like my 9 to 5, and then my Instagram is after hours. So be prepared for that. It's at micalexis. And then I'm also on Instagram, or not on Instagram, on TikTok with the best handle, which is LinkedIn Queen. And that's where I will choose followers and give reviews of their LinkedIn profiles on TikTok.
Awesome. So, Eric, where can people who want to find out more about you, your podcast, Agorapulse, where do they need to go to find out more about all things Eric Fisher?
Yeah, real quick, just go to beyondthetodolist.com for the podcast. Check out the Social Media Manager School at socialmediamanagerschool.com. That's where you can get training for you and your team for free on social media.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for your questions today. Thank you, Michaela, so much for being here. Our next show is on Friday, February 12th, 2021 at 11 a.m. and 10 a.m. Central Time. You can find us at Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Thank you so much for Michaela, and thank you to Eric for being here. Don't forget, this is now a podcast. You can find us on Google, Stitcher, iTunes, all the places you get your podcasts. We would love for you guys to go there and give us a rating and review. And with that, I'm Jeff C., and I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.